Hello, everybody. This is Brett Lonsdale from Lightning Tools. I just want to say thank you for joining the webinar. First of all, what we're going to do is just do a quick intro as to who I am, who Lightning Tools is, and we're then going to take a look at the data viewer and how that can be used in both SharePoint and also inside of Microsoft Teams as well, in order to be able to display data that either resides inside of SharePoint or also external to SharePoint as well in different backend data sources. So that could be places like SQL. It could also be other data sources as well now, which include things like JIRA, Salesforce, and so on too. So we can display a grid of data. We can also display different types of charts of data. And we've got a few new charts that we're going to be announcing in this release this month that we'll be also taking a look at. So first of all, what I'm going to do is just drop my camera so you can see a little bit more of the screen here. And we're going to do a quick intro to Lightning Tools. So Lightning Tools is a company that is based in the UK. We also have our US office as well, which is based out in Orlando, Florida. And we established the company back in 2007 with the effort to provide different tools, different web parts and so on that extend the capabilities of Microsoft SharePoint. So that hopefully makes your life easier, not just in terms of data integration, which is how we started off with Lightning Tools, but also in other areas as well, such as permissions management, content aggregation, discussion boards, and even forms as well. So we can build out business forms inside of SharePoint lists. So we've been operating, like I say, since 2007 as a Microsoft Gold partner. We've also become accredited as a ISO 9001 and ISO 27001 company. So that's in terms of quality and also the information management security. As I mentioned, we've got a portfolio of different products. The one that we're going to be focusing in on today is the data viewer. This is a product that you can use completely on its own without anything else, but it's also a product that does integrate well with some of the other solutions that you can see on here as well. So if you are an existing customer of ours, maybe use the Social Square discussion boards, or if you use the Lightning Conductor to aggregate content, data viewer works extremely well with those two, and can also work well with Lightning Forms as well. So we'll have a quick look at some of that stuff as we go through the demo here today. So first of all, let's just do a quick intro as to what the data viewer is. So we're going to take a look at what sort of things you can do with the data viewer before we get into the new features that we're releasing this month. First of all, it's a self-service tool that you can embed as a web part on SharePoint pages. So we have a classic version of this. We also have the modern version, yeah, you can add it onto modern pages within inside your SharePoint environment. That of course includes Viva as well. So if you wanted to create web part components on a Viva Connect page that displays external data, you can do that. Or you can also add it as a Teams tab as well inside of a Teams channel. So you could expose data that way as well. So a lot of people typically ask a question about how or why would we use this in terms of data connections when we're got tools such as Power BI as well at our fingertips. So that is a valid question. We can use Power BI obviously to also connect to a lot of the similar different data sources and display dashboards on that information. But Power BI can also be quite expensive for organizations, and of course it has quite a learning curve to go with it as well. So what we've created here, the emphasis being on the self-service tool, is this is something that users can simply add onto a SharePoint page, and they don't have to go into a separate application or anything to be able to configure it. So it is the self-service tool that again you could use either inside of SharePoint or inside of the Teams environment. So the idea is that we add it as a component, we configure it to different types of data sources. So those data sources could be a SharePoint list or a SharePoint library inside of your environment. That doesn't have to be inside the same site. It can actually be in any site collection that you happen to have access to. And any other user that accesses your page will see a security trimmed instance of that data. So if they don't have access to the list, of course, we're not going to be able to render it. They'll see a message according to that. But if they do have access, then yeah, they'll be able to display that information. So that bridges the gap between some of the challenges with things like contact lists that we may want to have show up in multiple different sites rather than maintaining multiple lists of the same type and duplicating information. Those of you that may be as old as me may remember Excel services as well. So Excel services was something that disappeared around, I think, SharePoint 2010. But that was a great tool for connecting to different tables of data inside of Excel, or also charts inside of Excel as well, and exposing them out to a SharePoint dashboard. And this is also something that the data viewer can now do for us. So you can display that data. It's dynamic, so as people update the Excel spreadsheet, we're going to see those changes reflected inside the web part. And then we can also go against OData services as well. So if there's any data that we're exposing through OData, we can connect to that. We can go to SQL Azure. We can also use business connectivity services if we want to. And new to the data viewer, I'm going to show you this, but I'll spoil the surprise here. We also have now the Microsoft Graph connectors as well, which means that we can now connect to a lot more things, including on-premises databases and other solutions such as Salesforce and JIRA and things like that as well. So once we've created a connection, we can display the data in multiple places. We can build grids of data with conditional formatting and grouping and things like that to really make the data stand out, make it easy to navigate. Or we can also build out our charts with it as well. So that includes, as you can see, pie charts and line charts, column charts, etc. We've got tree maps and gauges, and there's also some new charts that we're going to be announcing at the end of this webinar too, that you'll be able to take a look at. You can also connect multiple data viewers together as well, or you can connect to other web parts. So one of them is the Lightning Filters web part. This is really useful on a dashboard. It means that we can create a filter control at the top of the page, and that could filter out multiple instances of the data viewer. So maybe looking at different months of the year, or looking at different drop-down options or different people, and have all of the components on the page filter as a result of that. And we could also connect to the Lightning Conductor. So that would allow us to display charts on aggregated content, as well as just a single SharePoint list, which we can do with the data viewer. And as I mentioned, you can also connect multiple instances of the data viewer together. And here's an example of that, which we'll actually see in a live demo as well, but just to talk through it in the slide, you'll see here two data viewers on the page. So these are configured to display the data in a grid as opposed to in a chart. And what you can see, one of them is showing customer information. This is coming from an external database. And we've also got order information in another instance of the web part over on the right-hand side. So the idea being, when we go through and select some different rows from the customers list, we're seeing the relevant orders to those customers showing up inside the other web part. And we could go further than that. You'll notice that I've also got an order selected, and beneath that, the order details would show up. So I'll go through and show you how that can be configured using those web part connections. So let's get into that. I'm just going to bring up my SharePoint page, so you'll be able to see this in action. So what we have here is a connection to external data in SharePoint, and I'll show you the solution first, so and then we'll have a look at how it's configured. So you'll notice in here, there's the orders data viewer, as well as the customers data viewer and the order details. And as we go through and select one of those rows or multiple rows here, we'll see the orders showing up that those specific customers have placed. So again, this doesn't have to be coming from an SQL database. Now this could come from something like Salesforce, HubSpot, JIRA, etc. And we can very easily create a dashboard or create the web part so that that data can be viewed by people, and you're not having to train them on those backend systems if they're not going to be using it every day. So selecting those rows, we see the orders, and then we could go through and select some of those orders in order to see the order details. So now we're seeing the product IDs that were on those orders, as well as the unit price, the quantity that's in stock, and also any discounts that were applied as well. You'll also notice down at the bottom here, there's a chart, which we'll also get into and explain how that's configured with the data viewer. You will see some instances being set up from scratch, but there's so many different ways of connecting the data viewer. I'll just show you initially some of the existing connections that I've created. So when we edit the page and we go into the web part properties, you'll notice the property pane over on the right hand side, and here's a view. It's just called default at the moment because it's the only view. And when I go into the configuration for that, you'll notice the different data source providers that we can work with. So there is the SharePoint list, there is business connectivity services and OData services. We've also got the SQL Azure, which we'll be looking at in a moment, Excel, the new Microsoft Graph connectors, or another web part on the page as well. So that's how we can go through and consume the content coming in from the Lightning conductor. So that's a simple configuration there. The only thing that changes based on the data source provider is the data source tab. So notice how this one is pointing to a service at the moment, and we've also got all the different entities that we can select coming from that web service. So I'm choosing the customers one in that particular instance. And of course, if I was to go through and choose something like SQL Azure or Excel, that data source tab is going to look different. We'd configure that obviously in a different way. And likewise with the display provider. So there's two different display providers. There's the grid view or the chart view. If we're working with the grid view, we select the columns from the data source that we want to see. We can also add calculated columns and things like that if we want to. And we've also then got the display, which is where we can do things like our conditional formatting and grouping and so on as well. So yeah, if we wanted, for instance, one of these customers that was based in France, we could go through and add the conditional formatting through here. So we've got the standard sort of data formatting and so on, but in there is also the conditional formatting where we could then say the country is equal to France. And if that was the case, we could go through and set different colors and so on to highlight that. It could be a foreground color or a background color. You can choose icons and so on as well. If you want, and I'll show you a few examples of that as we go through. So that's configuring the grid view. You can also configure it actually from here. So whilst we're still in edit mode, notice that we can show additional columns as well. So if I wanted the phone number to also display, we could go through and select that without actually having to go through and configure it. And then once I hit publish or republish in this case, you won't see that. We're now sort of in the end user experience. So you've got the sorting and you've got the filtering that you can set as an end user that doesn't have access to the edit of the page. Okay, so that's just one kind of example of configuring the grid view, and we'll also jump into some other examples here. So this one here is actually connecting to some aggregated content. So there's a web part on the left hand side, which is actually the Lightning Conductor web part. So this is our content aggregation tool that is rolling up tasks from multiple different places. It's also capable of rolling up document libraries or connecting to other apps like Microsoft Planner or Teams or OneDrive, etc., and bringing that information into one view. So you'll notice there's a couple of different views that I've created here, one called task list, one called users. So what might be useful with things like tasks is rather than just display it in a grid view like I am here, we could actually connect to that and chart it. So both of these instances are charting the results coming in from the Lightning Conductor. So again, if I was to go in and edit the page here, we'll have a look at how that's configured. So we can go through and select the instance on the right here. You'll notice that again, we've got the default view, and here it is connected to the current page data source. So once we're doing that, the data source is actually the Lightning Conductor, and we can then go through and configure that connection. So in here, I can choose the other web part that's on the page that I want to connect to, whether I want to work with all of the retrieved items or just selected items. So a moment ago, you saw me working with selected items where I was able to choose individual customers and see the orders to those customers. That's a sort of different scenario to this one. So we're bringing back all of the results and then basing a chart on it. So we choose the columns that we want to see, and under the display here, we can then choose the type of chart. So if I wanted to change this maybe from a pie or a donut chart to a combo chart, that's something that I can do. We can then go through and configure this so it's not necessarily showing as a line. We could show it as a column. We could choose the theme color so it stands out more, and configure our chart however we want. And in here we're grouping by the priority, and we're doing an average on the percent complete. We could do a count on that or a sum, whatever we wanted to do to add that source into it. There's also some chart settings in here. So depending on what you want to do, we can go through and set things like background colors. We can have stacked charts. There's now also animations that we can have, so that the chart displays sort of dynamically when you land on that page. But yeah, that is getting its results from a completely different component and displaying those there. And then another similar example is this one where we've got a tree view. So again, it's a chart view. It's also connected to the Lightning adapter to get the results. So that's through the data source. The only difference here is that we're using this tree map control, and with the tree map, we've set the priority as how we're going to group, and then we're basically counting the ID column to see how many high priority, low priority, or normal priority tasks there are. And then through the chart settings on that one, we can go through and set what these colors are going to be for a sort of minimum color all the way up to a maximum color, and then any mid colors. So we could sort of go more green if we wanted to, and save that, and you can see how that green is coming through there for medium values. So that's working with the Lightning adapter as a data source. And we've also then got another one here, which is going to show off some of the new features where we're also working with OData. And I'll show you how we can configure all of that from scratch in a moment. And one other example, this is actually opening up in Teams. So this is actually displaying a SharePoint page inside of Teams, so we can have multiple web parts together. But just to give you a sort of taster of the different types of charts that we can create, notice in here we've got a multiple series chart, so that's showing a line as well as a column chart. We've got the tree map again. We have a donut chart. We have gauges that we can also display, and of course the column charts as well. And even with the grid view, you can do the conditional formatting. So in here I've got answered with a thumbs down icon on all of these posts if they've not yet been answered. So that's actually reporting against our social squared web part, which has lists as a backend. So each of these is actually connecting to a SharePoint list this time. So if we go into the properties of some of these views, notice the SharePoint list is the data source provider, and then when we're on that data source tab, which is basically connecting to this posts list, which is the where the posts go for our social squared discussion forums. All right, so there's a few different examples of the sort of thing that you can do. Let's go through and create a new page, and I'll show you how we can configure these from scratch. So in here, I'm just going to go in and add a new page. So this will be a blank page. And we'll just call this data view demo. And what is useful, just as a little tip, is I like to create multiple columns when we're using the data viewer. So if you do want to have a dashboard, that's useful, so you can show different charts side by side rather than just having each chart stacked on top of each other. So I could add multiple instances here, one over on the left, one on the right. And what I'm going to do is connect to the OData service that you saw me use earlier initially, and then we'll also get into some of the other ones such as Excel and so on as well. So in here we've got the data source provider, so that could be a list. You'll notice that data source tab allows me to browse to where that list might be, so we can span the different site collections and choose the list or library that we want to connect to. If I go down to OData here, the data source is expecting me to drop in a URL. So once we load the entities for that, we could choose something like products, nice and easy. And from products, it's showing me each of these different columns. So in there, we could show things like the product name, the unit price, units in stock, units on order, and so on. And also maybe whether it's a discontinued product or not. Let's bring that down here. And we could also add some calculated columns. So a calculated column could be something like the units in stock plus the units on order, or something along those lines. So with this, you can go through and choose the units in stock and just add that to units on order. So we could call that a total stock, make it a double or integer, and save that. And we've now got a brand new column that we can display inside the web part as well. Okay. The other thing we can do, like I say, is filtering, sorting, and conditional formatting. So when we're getting into conditional formatting, what we could do is set some formatting on something like the units in stock here. So if I was to say that the units in stock is less than 5, we could go through and display an icon. It could be a downward pointing arrow here. We could make that arrow red. We could choose whether we're just showing the icon or showing the value as well. And if I save that, what we should see, yeah, there we go. So it's fairly subtle, but we've got under the units in stock, the Chef Anton's gumbo mix is showing us a red icon there because the stock is actually at 0. So we can set the conditional formatting and so on like that. And we could also get back into this and do grouping and that sort of thing. So maybe we want to group by the discontinued. So if we find that in here, we could choose group by there. We could set the grouping order if we were grouping by multiple columns. And we can also do things like setting pagination and things like that as well. Okay, so there's all the discontinued products all together and what have you. Now you can also have multiple views. So if I called this all products, we could then add another new view, which might be all customers. So now we can go through, again, connect to the OData service using the grid view, drop in the same URL. We'll bring back customers this time. We can choose the columns that we want to show from that entity, and of course apply some conditional formatting and so on. And now we've got that data coming through as well. And that can be filtered from the end user experience, or we could also add a filter web part. So if I create a full column section at the top here, I can add lightning filters. And notice how lightning filters has different types of filter values that we might want to provide. So one of them here could be a choice filter. I could manage those choices. And what I'm going to do is just go through on some of these cities. So we're just going to add London and Berlin. So we can have a display value as well as a filterable value. So we can add those. And of course, imagine I've added a lot more. And then in here, we could set this label to say choose city. And within our lightning conductor, in our data viewer, I could then go against the city column and connect that. Rather than giving it a static value, we can connect that to the choose a city web part, which is the one that we just created, go against that filterable value. And now notice how we can choose London, see all our customers in London, or we can also see all the customers in Berlin and so on. So that's how we can start to put a dashboard together with some of these different components. So over on the right, we'll this time connect to Excel just for a change of scenery. So we'll go against Excel and we'll build a chart. So under the data source tab, this is now changed to allowing me to navigate to where my Excel documents are stored. So I'm going to go to this document library here. There's 2 Excel documents that is found. We're going to go against the sales revenue. It's picked up the range automatically of any tables that are defined in there, and we can select that and start to choose our columns. So we've got 3 columns. We could add a calculated column again. So I've got sales revenue and target. What I might want to do is just add one that says profit in there. We'll make that a double, and we're just going to calculate it. So I'll put sales revenue times by 0.4. It'd be nice if that was always the case, but yeah, we can go through and add that. So we've got profit showing in there, and that profit can now show up on my chart as well. This is the combo chart, and the combo chart would allow me to mix and match between things like columns, and I'll pick the theme color again for that one. Profit, we could show this one as an area. I'll keep that bright green. Profit's not really showing up on there. Let's do this one as an area. Okay, so the area is going to be opaque, so you can see how that sort of takes that background and so on as well. And yeah, we could group by months and so on and so forth. So there's our combo chart, and again, we can enable some animation on that, choose the amount of time it takes for that animation to display, and so on. Okay, so there's the configuration from an Excel workbook to bring that data dynamically into SharePoint. And again, as I update that Excel workbook, that's going to update my chart behind the scenes. All right, so that is the kind of thing that we can deliver using the data viewer. Let's get into some of the new features. So we've just talked about building some charts. We talked about the different Lightning Tools products that we may also want to connect to using this, and we'll have a look at what is new in this version. So there's basically 4 new features. One of them you've just seen, that's the animated charts. So these were just static on the page. They were dynamic in terms of the connection, but you didn't see the bars grow and that sort of thing as we land on the page. So that's a subtle new feature, but welcome one. We have a new data source, and that is the external graph connectors. So we're going to talk about that for a moment. And then we've also got 2 new chart types that we can also work with. So I'm going to just jump back into SharePoint and walk you through these. So in here, you'll see some of them pre-configured again, but we'll go through and configure these. So what we have over on the left-hand side is a customer list, and we've got all customers that we can display, or I've also got another view which is selected using the country filter. So I'm just going to go back to the all customer list, and what that is going to do for me is show those customers inside the map here. So so each of these that are showing is going to show up on the map. If I change to show selected, notice that no items are showing here until I start selecting them. So if I look at my customer list and think, well, where on earth is that? I could go through and select that customer, again, a connection between the two, which is useful. I'll show you how that's configured in a moment. We've also got revenue by region in here as well. So that is pointing to another table from the same data source called invoices, and that invoice obviously has a total invoice amount, and we're able to show the spend basically from our customers on the map. So the darker the color, we can see how much each region or each country is spending with us. Another new feature is working with external graph connectors. This one here is bringing in data from JIRA. This is actually live Lightning Tools data. So these are some of the different features or issues that are being reported in our product. So all of these are under the Lightning Conductor code. These are the people that have reported the issues, and what I've then done is connected to that using a chart. So we're displaying the information in a grid as well as displaying that information in a chart. So we can see, for instance, how many issues each person has reported against that product inside of JIRA. Okay, so let's have a look at how these are configured. So if we just edit the page again. All right, and I'll add a fresh instance. So you can see this from scratch. I'm going to select the data viewer. Let's just hit configure, and we'll go against an OData service using the chart view, and the OData service that I'm going to use, I'm just going to paste that in. So that is the Northwind sample database, and we're going to go against the list of customers. So once we've selected those customers, we can go through and choose the things like the company name, the city, the address, the country, and so on. Obviously specify the order if we want to. And then under the display, we're able to come down here to the map display. Now, it does tell me I need to put in a API key to use the map component. So that is true. And we should have it. There we go. I'm just going to grab it from here. So it's one more time, just try that. So we'll go to the, sorry, let me just paste that in. There we go. So we'll go to the OData service, choose the chart view. Let's paste in our OData service one more time. Connect to customers. We'll choose the columns that we want to see. And under the display, we'll come down and choose map. So we of course need to give it the mapping of what contains the latitude, longitude, or location somehow. So this could be based on city or country. And let's just save that. And give a page a refresh. There we go. So we're quite zoomed in. So let's just zoom out here. And there's all the customers showing. And you can control that initial zoom as well. So I'll show you some of the different properties that we can set on this. So when we go into our default view, we can hit on the view here, go to the chart settings, and this is where we can control that initial zoom level. So I could bring it right down to 2. And there's also different map types that we can also show. So we've got hybrid maps and satellite maps, etc. So we just change that one to terrain. We can change the type of icons and the tooltips as well that you get with that. So this is zoomed out now. So when we land on the page, it's going to show that in a more effective way. All right, so that's using the map component. And then if we take a look at this one here, so this is a slightly different one. This is invoice value by region. Also using an OData service, so we'll add a new instance again, just so you can see that from the ground up. So let's come back down to OData service, chart view, paste in the same web service, and this time we're going to go against the invoices. So under invoices, we again have things like city and country, and I also have multiple decimal columns that I could work with, and its extended price is the one that I want to work with in here. So that's initially showing me here as a combo chart, but we can come down to this geo map, and you can see in here it's already picked up the extended price. We can group by the city, or we could also group by the country, depending on how we want to display that. And again, we can go in and configure the chart. So maybe I don't need to show the entire world, in which case we could just focus in on certain countries. So I could choose the Americas, for example, save that, and it's going to focus in on that. We could also change each of the different colors here. So we can set a background color. We've got a default color that we could set, so that could blend in with the theme actually. And then we've got a start and end color for our axis. So we could have, let's go with something like red. There's a light red and then a dark red. And save that one. So you can see how that's coming through. It looks fairly pink if the values are low and darker red if the values are high. Okay, so that's how we can very easily configure our map component. And again, there's different styles of that too. So if we once again just jump back into the properties here, the display mode is currently set to auto, but what we could do is have markers set, or we could also, sorry, as regions, we could have markers, which shows the circle on the different countries instead of coloring in that entire country. So that's just a different variation of displaying that same sort of content. Okay, and these can also be interactive as well as you select each country. All right, so they are the new features. One of the things I did just want to talk about was the graph connectors. So if we just jump into my SharePoint admin here, you'll notice that I've got several different external connectors created. This is where you can add different connectors as well. So it'll give me a choice of different things to connect to. So notice these could be things like Oracle databases, you can connect to file shares, SQL Server, there's Salesforce, etc. These are just the sort of out of the box ones that come with Microsoft. But what you can also do is create a custom connector and build that connection yourself to whatever it might be. We can even connect to our website if we wanted to and display the content that way. So that can then, once that's configured, that can become the data source within the data viewer to display the results from that, and that would include the charts and so on as well. Okay, so yeah, if you want to know more about that, by the way, you can Google Microsoft Graph Connectors. There's a lot of content on it, or external graph connectors, and you'll be able to find some configuration help with those. So I know there's only a few people on the call because this is our late at night one. So giving an alternative time to our typical US Eastern business hours. So yeah, if there are any questions, feel free to post those questions in the chat pane or in the Q&A panel. Either would work. And if not, there is my email address on the slide here, so brett@lightningtools.com. If a question pops up in your mind a little bit later today, just feel free to drop me an email with that question. I'll be happy to answer it. And of course, you can reach out to sales@lightningtools.com as well. If you've got any questions for the sales team, you can reach out to them. Okay, there is a question about connecting to Salesforce. So I don't actually have access to a Salesforce environment, so I can't demonstrate that to you. Yeah, let me see if I can get some documentation. Yeah, as you just elaborated, so some documentation on doing that. There should be plenty already out there. You'll notice in here there is the connect to Salesforce option, which you can do from your tenant. So in here, if you gave it the name of your Salesforce environment, it's going to ask you for connection settings as the next step, and so on, as you can see. So as we go through that, you can configure your connection. I just don't have one to connect to, I'm afraid, but yeah, it's using the standard sort of client ID and client secret, etc., to connect to that, and then we can go through there. But yeah, there'll be plenty of help available on the Microsoft documentation in order to be able to configure that. Once you have done, you could just simply use that in the data viewer. Right, I think that's the only question for now, but yeah, I will follow up with a link to that documentation and find that for you as well. Okay, so at that point, I'll yeah, thank you for attending. I hope you did find this this useful. Like I say, if there's any other questions that do come up, just please feel free to reach out to me on brett@lightningtools.com, and I'll be happy to help you out. And thank you all. Have a good rest of the day or evening. Thank you. Bye bye.